Ooh, going live.
Going live. This is so exciting.
Right?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our community conversation. I am super excited. Hopefully, you have already been having such a great time since the doors open at 10:30 Eastern time. But this has been so great so far. I met so many great people already in the networking sessions and all sorts of the huddles and the expo booths. So please, I encourage you to go check out all of the great offerings we have today in Audio Recess. Please drop your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. All of us want to say hi to you. We are super excited to be having this conversation. And this is a community conversation. So please talk to us. Drop your questions, drop your comments in the chat, and also just say hi. Put your name, where are you joining us from, and your location. But I'm excited because I get to talk with these three amazing, dynamic audio makers in the industry. We are literally all over, and you'll hear about like where we are and where we're located and what we're doing. But I'm super excited. I see people filing in now. Casey joining us from Massachusetts. We have someone from Des Moines, Iowa, Toronto. Hi, everyone. So yes, please drop your name and location in the chat. And what are you looking to know? What are some questions you want to ask us? It's all about building communities. So like, how do you want to build community today? So also a little bit of housekeeping just for the best viewing experience. If you have headphones, I definitely encourage you to use them. And if you want to view us in full screen, just double click on the screen to view us in full screen. And again, as I reiterate, feel free to interact with us in the chat, ask questions, comment. This is a community conversation, so that includes you at home. So please feel free just to drop any comments or questions in the chat, and also any links. So we are so excited. So enough of me talking. I have three amazing audio makers joining me right now. I'm gonna just do a quick intro. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Se'era Spragley Ricks, and I'm the community manager at PRX Podcast Garage. And for those who don't know what PRX is a nonprofit media organization that specializes in audio journalism and storytelling. And the Podcast Garage is a recording studio, classroom, and event space for audio storytellers of all experience levels. And across our work, our priorities are to create accessible and affordable entry points for new audio makers and represent the voices and stories of everyone in our community, not just the place that we're physically located, but also virtually. So this is why Audio Recess from PRX and Google Podcast Creative Program is so important and necessary. Audio Recess is a space for open conversation, relationship building, and play and fun. So right now you're tuning into our community conversation, which we talk about assembling your tribe and building your podcasting community. A convo that talks about how we build community in these unprecedented times, because 2020 has been really crazy, to say the least. So before we dive into our community conversation, let's meet our dynamic panelists who we're here from and talk with today. So let's start with Josephine. Tell us about yourself and the work that you do.
Hey, Se'era, thank you. My name is Josephine Karianjahi. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm a co-director of Africa Podfest, which is one of Africa's best places to connect with African podcasters and to discover amazing new pods. I am a podcaster. I have a little pod that has big ambitions called This I Can Do podcast. And it is definitely a space that I'm hoping to learn and grow much more during today's event and beyond. And over to where I spend my time, I am calling in from Dusseldorf, Germany, where I live. And this is our online space where we play, we make podcasts, we share podcasts, and we talk to people who make them and people who love them at the same time. So my background is in connecting people. I bring people together formally through work, informally through meetups, and also very much a passion of mine is moving the conversation from the exclusion where people kind of feel that rare air into a more inclusive conversation. And what I mean by this for the podcasting space is that these conversations about global podcasting a lot of times do not include Africa and the global South. So we are definitely trying to change that, change the conversation. And I think constantly about people and how, podcasts do improve their health, make us more connected. And I'm definitely shouting out all the African podcasters from all over the world joining us. Thank you for supporting us at Africa Podfest, and I hope this conversation is as exciting as it has begun. So thank you.
And make sure you check out Africa Podfest. We're going to drop that link in the chat. But please make sure you connect with Josephine, look at her profile, and really connect with her. And Africa Podfest is doing some really great things. And I'm super excited for the next iteration of it. So yes, Melissa, introduce yourself.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Mbugua, Mel as well. And I am from Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm based here as well as at the moment. I am a co-director of Africa Podfest, which is something that came out of a real desire to just see what the future media ecosystem could look like in Africa and for Africans. So as a podcast fan, I have been so curious for years to learn and know more about what the African stories are. My background is in technology and also the cultural industries. So my kind of big vision and big mission in my work life is to build out the ecosystem that will form the foundation for the next generation of the creative industries for Africa, which is largely on the internet. So I'm also a podcaster, actually a new podcaster. I kind of came in through the scenic route, started a podcast festival before I started a podcast. And so I started a podcast this year, which is all about exploring our imagination and embracing uncertainty and seeing what the future could look like, imagining what the future could look like, and having this conversation together. That's me.
Thank you, Melissa, and welcome. And also please check out her podcast. And I'm super excited for the new episodes that are coming out. And again, I think it's super important to just establish and build on the work that you're doing and on the virtual platform is much needed, especially during this times. And we'll touch on that in this conversation. Last but not least, Rhea.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rhea. How am I going to introduce myself? So I actually quit my job 2 years ago to become a full-time podcaster, starting my very own podcast and then my production company. And so similar to Josephine and Melissa, I'm from Lebanon, from the Middle East, and I noticed that all the stories that are around me were neither on TV nor in movies, and it was either portrayed badly or misrepresented on international media, or controlled by older men who didn't really have a touch on the pulse of what was going on. So I said, why don't I start a podcast production company? And I knew nobody. It was just me. I convinced one of my best friends to start a podcast with me, which is called Who Run the World, which is about exploring the different identities of Arab women. And then I found another friend who was also wanting to do a podcast, and we got together and we started doing Her Stage, which was part of the Google Podcast Creator Program with PRX. And then through all those different things, I just started meeting people and learning how much education and really educate and getting together with different podcasters and having informal brainstorming and supporting each other and sharing each other's shows, how important that was, which eventually led me to my current day job. So I do have my production company, but I also currently work at Deezer, which is a streaming platform. And I look after podcasts in the Middle East and in Turkey. And through that job, also, I've made it my mission to help build that ecosystem and to go talk with podcasters and see how to connect them with each other, but also how to connect them with their audience. So really building a wider community. So I'm really excited to dive deeper in this topic today.
I'm so excited to have you here, Rhea. And I just can't, I'm just going to just go into the conversation because this is really, I'm excited. And also just a quick reminder before we dive deep into this conversation, which we are about to, this is a live discussion. So we encourage you to use the chat feature to express your thoughts and comments and ask questions. And we would definitely get to those comments and questions. So 8 months ago, life as we all knew it changed immensely. Like we were hit with a global pandemic, a global novel virus that keep us contained in our homes and has reoriented our relationship to the outside world and even to each other. And due to COVID-19, networking with podcasters and creators within the industry is much harder due to travel bans and the inability to gather in person. So some of those just off the cuffs or just like natural conversations that would normally take place in those areas that we were able to congregate and meet, we can't do that anymore. So what do we do? How do we find ways to support and advocate for each other in this new normal? So my first question for our panelists is about our humanity, because these are crazy times. So how are you maintaining and coping during the pandemic? There are a lot of people directly and indirectly affected by COVID, and sometimes in our professional lives or in our spaces, we don't make space for vulnerability and productivity. During moments of isolation and quarantine, it can be hard to tap into our creativity. So how are you maintaining hope, health, and creating during this time? And we'll start with Rhea.
Well, so just a little story time for everyone very quickly. So I moved to Dubai on a Monday, and then the following Monday, lockdown happened. So I was starting a new job in a new city, luckily my co-host and best friend lived here. So I moved in with her. It was supposed to be 2 weeks, ended up being 4 months with her and her husband. And I was starting a job where we were launching the podcast feature on Deezer in a month. And my first mission at work was to talk to podcasters and get them to put their podcasts on Deezer so that we can start giving that offering to our users. And also coming off of Lebanon that was going through a crisis and all that. So in terms of emotions and vulnerability, it was all over the place. And podcasting kind of saved me because me and my co-host just started really going hard into podcasting, into creating shows every week. She had lost her job. She was laid off because of COVID. And then so we just ended up talking about it on our podcast. And also I just started emailing podcasters, just sending out 20, 30 emails a day and having conversations. And the first question, kind of like this panel, was like, how are you doing? How's everyone doing? How are you podcasting? I was part of Slack channels where people would start sending pictures of their studio. And so it felt like everyone was in it together. And so I just ended up taking the opportunity, whether it was with my co-host who I was sharing a home with or through the different conversations, to just start talking about the creative process and what are you going through right now, and also I think also sharing pictures of our home studios kind of brought people together and kind of encouraged you. So that's how I dealt with it. It was going to look for other people who were in a similar situation to kind of get us through it.
How about Josephine? How did you deal with it? How are you maintaining hope?
We started the year on such a high note. We had such big plans to have the first African podcast festival on the continent. We had people coming in from all parts of the world, podcasters, podcast supporters, different community members. And a week to the date, we had to shut down the festival for the year because in Kenya, the international situation made local regulations come into effect. So we had to close everything down. And I think the most heartbreaking part of it was having to say to the creative teams that were helping us put it together that we were not going to have the festival, and then we're not going to be able to, really, invest in our local economy, make sure that creatives have money in their pockets to start off the season, we also had an opportunity to kind of just be like, wow, what happened? Like for us, we're really like, wow, like really, really wow. I had no idea what we were going to do next. We've spent a lot of time co-creating what the festival would look like. We'd spent, a lot of time convincing people that it was worth looking at Africa as a destination for podcast investment, podcast conversations. And now we had to call everybody and say, oh, sorry, we don't know when we're going to have our festival. But then, just, hang around our website, keep in touch with our socials. And, very fortunate to have a team that was able to really pull together virtual sessions that highlighted kind of what the conversations would have looked like with people from different parts of the continent. We had panelists from Kenya, Zambia, South Africa, kind of sit down and really talk about, and also beyond, talk about what podcasting and podcasting possibilities could look like. So it's been really isolating. We've tried to kind of gather ourselves, but it's not like we're still not yet all the way gathered round. And that's really tough. I think we've also tried to reach out to other podcasters across the continent, and what they're doing. I think we talked to Volume Africa. They're doing a distributed podcast studio, so they kind of break apart the studio and have one person do production in this part of production in their home, another quiet space in their home. And so, this is the normal. This became like typical. What was interesting is that there are a lot of people who started their podcasts across Africa because we do have that mobile connectivity. We are an Android continent. So a lot of people are on Google Podcasts. They're on SoundCloud, and there are other platforms for their pods. So a lot of new podcasts picked up. And that was really hopeful. And they weren't, a lot of them were about the situation with the pandemic, but a lot of them were just about saying, you know what, I've been putting this off for so long. I have something unique to offer into this space. And here's my first episode. So it's been that kind of year so far.
Yeah, I can definitely see, like, especially with this type of year, being able to tap into your creativity. Yes, it is like a global pandemic, but we have a little bit more time than we were afforded before to go after those goals that we were setting. Like, I'll start a podcast, but not yet. And then now, like, there's time. Like, what is holding us back? So I definitely and seeing the new podcasts pop up, even the people that like I used to interact with at the podcast garage and they actually are starting their podcast, I get so excited because I'm like, yes, you took the leap. And you don't have to be perfect to start, but just putting something out there that has seeing the new podcast come out, even in the midst of a global pandemic, definitely has been giving me hope as well. Melissa, how have you been maintaining hope during this time?
Yeah, it's been a really, really, difficult time. First of all, for us, there was a huge kind of sense of excitement, and then our bubble burst because we weren't able to host the first ever, African podcast festival. So after that, though, what really helped, at least for me, to keep my hope, keep my hope up and my creativity also still flowing, was that we are actually part of a media innovation community here in Nairobi called Baraza Media Lab, which is also new, right? It's about a year old as well, just like Africa Podfest. And so immediately, Baraza switched the offline community hangouts into virtual sessions. And then this is like immediately the shutdown happened. So that was, and we were the conversations were so vulnerable and so raw, and that beginning, chaotic, beginning this pandemic season on a vulnerable, honest note, kept a lot of people and us included, really feeling like, okay, there's no shame in having things fail or not work out, or there's no shame in feeling like, confused. And what do I do? And so I'm one of those people who had a podcast idea that had been brewing, and then now suddenly I had more time to kind of develop it, right? And actually get support from Joe, harassing her to like give me feedback, for example, and the folks over at Baraza, our friends, our co-creators, just so being part of a community really is what has been the lifeboat, which is turning into more than merely a survival strategy. It's becoming actually the foundation of where we're getting our strength from as individuals, so like as a podcaster, but also as an organization, that's Africa Podfest. The community is it.
Melissa, I'm so glad you started touching on like the importance of community, and community is something we lean on during difficult times. Being part of a community can make us feel as though we're a part of something greater than ourselves, and it can give us opportunities to connect with others to reach for our goals, like you did with starting your podcast, even in the middle of a pandemic. And it can make us feel safe and secure. It pretty much unites us all and just push us and support one another during these times. So piggybacking off of what you just said, what does community mean to each one of you in the work that you do and in this industry? And can you explain the importance of assembling your tribe or your network, and why are those relationships important? So either one of you can start.
You can go first, Melissa. I think I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear it, from you.
So in the first place, like what the reason why casting is so interesting as a medium, from my perspective, is that it's centered on bringing together like-minded people, unlike other forms of media that are more kind of to the masses. Podcasting is so intimate, and so it gathers the villagers together, in that around the shared interest or themes, whatever topic or whatever theme the podcast may be about. And that sense of, you feel like, at least listener to host, you feel like you actually know, you're talking to each other. And so that's so exciting to me about podcasts. I can find a group of people and actually make friends and kind of build a life on the basis of this interest. That before this time, growing up, I just thought I was alone and was the nerd who was into for example, who loves cheese. African people are not into cheese. Sorry, it sounds like a ridiculous example, but cheese is not a big thing in Africa. I love cheese. So it's so if I start talking about it and kind of build a podcast around meals, cheese, I can't for example. And so community to me is the basis of what makes podcasting so interesting. And also in context, the African context, much of the global South, where media is very stifled just because of the way politics plays out. This means so much for the fact that someone can just be by themselves in any part of the world and kind of express themselves freely and gather their people safely, and develop relationships and go in depth into whatever subjects that the podcast covers, and get to know each other, and then gather with the wider podcast community. So for example, what we're doing here at a global level, and then there's also pockets in country or regional level. It's just it's a game changer for what media just for the reality of the role of media in the world. It's no longer just institution to society, being in that mass media way. It's pockets of communities connecting with each other, and I call them, villages. That's why I think I use the word villages, and I like this. So to me, podcasting is a game changer, and because it brings us back to this it's media that allows us to come back to this very, very, very innate way that we are as humans, which is we are always seeking local community, intimate community.
And
that's my
absolutely. I think that also the difficulty of trying to assemble, especially now, trying to figure out what relationships work during in a space where it's not as well mapped out who's listening to podcasts across Africa, who or even beyond. And I think I recognize the fact that we're starting to build stories around what African podcasting looks like, but we're not building the stories. African podcasters have been generous with their stories to come and share how did they get started, what are they doing in terms of their knowledge. And I think I've seen a lot of us, creating in isolation and really gravitating to kind of the water coolers online. And for a lot of us, it's social media. For other people, it's the comment section on your favorite podcasts platform. And a lot of times, it feels like you're speaking into the void. Maybe no one will even understand what your issue is, or you don't have anyone who's listened to your pod so that they can give you a sense of, are you doing enough? Do you need to improve certain aspects of it? And that can be very isolating. And then a lot of African podcasters that we've met are creating around topics that are banned in their home countries. We've got several podcast producers who, the regulators and officials have tried to ban in their countries for the content that they produce. And, that's something that allows podcasting to, speak about things that may not necessarily be in the public domain, but need to be heard, especially around human rights, around advocacy, around, just the things that make our hearts beat. So that's a big way that these relationships strengthen the people who are listening to them across Africa and around the world as well.
It's incredible the parallel there is between the podcast scene in Africa and the podcast scene in the Middle East. It's so similar in terms of the topics that are being broached, in terms of people thinking that they're all alone. Like the number of times I've spoken to podcasters, they said, oh, there are others out there, just in terms of podcasts. So, and the way I look at community, just to piggyback off of what you guys are saying, for me, I feel there's two segments of this community. There's the community of your topic and your audience. So for example, we just released on one of my podcasts an episode about periods. Like we talked to Arab women about their periods, and I cannot tell you the number of women who are like, finally someone is talking about this, because women simply do not see themselves on television or in movies in the Arab world. So in terms of creating a space, Melissa, what you said, I related to that's really so much about whether it's your obsession or a topic or human rights issue, like that bridge that you're building with your audience who are hungry for this new kind of media is incredible. But I also would love to talk about the community as podcasters, because you feel so lonely. Like when I started out, I thought I was alone. I thought I came up with the brilliant idea of making podcasts in Arabic, and no one had thought about this because I had no idea about the scene. And lo and behold, there was an entire world, a small world, but an entire world out there nonetheless. And kind of bringing that community together and saying, hey, can you listen to my episode? What do you think? Hey, do you know a good sound designer? Hey, how do you edit? How do you do this? How do you do that? Because it is such a lonely, as a creator, it's such a lonely job, because yes, you're talking to your people, your tribe in terms of topic, but then when you're creating, you have no idea. And I think, Josephine, you said this, like, you don't even know if it's right or wrong what you're doing. So kind of reaching out to and I think also while working at Deezer, it has helped even more. It's reaching out to other podcasters and joining Slack channels and Facebook groups. I mean, I remember in Lebanon, we put together this Facebook group of podcasters, and we had never met. And then one day we're like, hey, let's meet in person. And the amount of brainstorming that happened in that like 2 hours in this little bar in Beirut was just so magical, because it finally felt that, oh, I've met my people, and I actually know people who are working on the same medium as me, and we can give each other advice. Because, I have so many friends who don't listen to podcasts. I'll send them my episode and they'll say like, oh, why don't you do music like on Radio Lab or whatever? And I'm like, I'm not Jad Abumrad. Like, I love him, but that's not me. So talking with people who are in the trenches, or the biggest question, how do you get more listeners? I don't know. So, so then be like, hey, you want to come on my podcast? I'll go on yours. Let's exchange listeners. So and then also being part of the Google Podcast Creator Program, opening that up to the world. And then look, I mean, I'm sure there are things that I can learn from Melissa and Josephine, because they're like, oh, this worked in the African podcast scene. I'm like, oh, but have you tried this? We've been doing this. And it's worked in Jordan, but it hasn't worked in Lebanon, and kind of exchanging these war stories, if you will. So creating that community and that tribe is so important, because it will allow us to create an industry in this region.
Yes, yes. And can I just add, we've been learning a little bit about Egypt from our friends at PodFest Cairo, and they've introduced us to a whole world of Egyptian podcasters, some of whom maybe are watching this conversation. But the incredible thing is, we spoke to one podcaster on our IG a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about the identity of being a woman from the Arab world speaking to women in the Arab world. And she happens to live in Egypt, but her roots are in so many different primarily Arab speaking countries. And she really helped us imagine the fact that geographically, yes, it's Africa, but it's literally the world, and it's not just our realities that are in our pods or that are affecting our lives. It's everyone. It's really, really interconnected. And
it's
I love
global.
that so much. Yeah.
And the fact there's no frontiers to podcasts, you just put it on the streaming platform. And actually at Deezer, we just launched a diaspora feature. So basically you can set the app wherever you are. So if you are, I don't know, an Egyptian living in the US, you can switch the app so that you're in Egypt. So then you get you will get recommended Egyptian podcasts, for example. So it's kind of breaking these barriers.
So the both of you, Rhea and Josephine, even Melissa, you kind of touched on this, like as we were talking about the importance of building community, and you could feel alone, like creating, especially during this time. We're not going to podcast movement or Third Coast in person, so you are forced to go online and like connect virtually. And Josephine, you mentioned commenting in Facebook comments, or Rhea, like the Slack channels or groups that you've been a part of, or other Facebook or even Facebook groups that you've been a part of. But for someone who is maybe an introverted personality or just navigating this whole new virtual space, I mean, we've gathered in person multiple times before March, but like now we have things like, Audio Recess today, and, Third Coast did third place, and we have Africa Podfest that is virtual. But how does someone, without the conferences or without the larger events, how do they connect with others in their own ways that feel natural and authentic to them? What is the best way? What are some practical tips that they can do those things that actually feel natural and feel not like they're imposing? Like, how do you strike up a conversation with someone just like, hey, I'm a podcaster, what's up? Or like, how do you do that in this space that we're in?
I think there's such, it's so hard to start talking to people somewhere online. We recognize that, just starting this last quarter of the year, we sent out an open call for African podcasters to send in just a couple of minutes of their podcasts, or maybe video if they prefer, and just kind of share who they are. And we put together this event called Africa Podcasters Roll Call in partnership with PodFest Cairo. And so it was like African podcasters, and, just from all over the continent. And let me tell you, people shared their links. Like, it was part of International Podcast Day. So shout out to the International Podcast Day community. But it really allowed us to listen to each other, because everybody's, either video was available live. People then joined. We had a call and we streamed it on our Facebook, and people, signed up and were able to come on, and we shared their prepared clip, and then we had them talk about themselves. And if you didn't necessarily want to talk about yourself, you could chat. You could kind of relate in a non-stressful way, hopefully. And it was literally the first time I've seen African podcasters from North, East, Central, West, South Africa gather together and listen to each other's content and shout out each other's pods. I mean, we are doing that now. I mean, like right now, we have another call out that's open today, because we want to talk to African podcasters about their experiences during the pandemic year. So if you, for example, if you're listening and you go to @Africa Podfest, there's literally just a simple form. and we want to hear from African podcasters about their experiences this year. And it's audio. It's a way for us to, we can't listen to all the audio we want to, but we want other people to listen to it much more than that. And so I think connecting with other people in ways that feel natural starts with, a lot of people send us direct messages and literally drop their links. And we would love to listen to all of them. But, the reality is we have to kind of focus on curating these opportunities to gather on behalf of folks who may not necessarily have that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. It's very difficult for a lot of people, like Se'era, you asked this question kind of from the perspective of like introverted people who, might not be, and a lot of podcasters actually are introverts, which is interesting. Yeah. Looking for many countries have communities, however big or small, even if there aren't, let's say, big conferences. So, for example, we know there's Podfest Cairo, there's a community in South Africa called PodMeet around, and then there's Niger Pod Hub in Nigeria. If like on social media, if you follow hashtags like African Podcaster, Los Podcasteros for Latin America, in the Middle East, I'm sure there's tags or accounts that people could follow, and then you kind of get plugged into the podcast community. And then, there it's much easier to just kind of message people or post on the Facebook group or just kind of DM someone on Twitter because you already know that they're a podcaster or a podcast supporter, they're in the community. So I would say the handy tip would be look for the hashtags around like podcasters, podcasting, even use like PRX and audio recess as a beginning. It'll open up, you enter the rabbit hole, for example.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I think finding those groups online is a great way to start. Like, for example, in MENA, we have a MENA podcast Slack channel, and there's about like 200, 300 of us, and you can just direct message anyone. And I think, so I'm going to talk as a podcaster, then I'm going to talk as someone who works at a platform. So I can tell you what we're looking for if someone is messaging us. I think that could be helpful. So as a podcaster, the way I started was I went niche. So I went for Arabic podcasters who were talking about women's issues. And there's like 2 podcasts or 3 podcasts that do that. Or maybe now there's much more, but at the time it was a very small group. So right away, we kind of started talking to each other and exchanging ideas and help. So kind of going to people who are talking to the same topic as you is a great entry point because you have all that in common. So you have kind of that intersection. And then actually through doing that, they helped introduce me to the wider podcasting landscape, which was great. And as Se'era also, I just wanted to about the introverted part, it is very difficult, I think, to kind of also build up that courage to send the email, and also sending your podcast is like sending a piece of yourself out there. So it's very difficult. So also just whenever you're messaging someone, just think, why am I messaging this person, right? What is my ask? And being very direct about that, because I think and having a short bio ready, having a short description of your podcast ready, having all these things at the ready, and just sending out as many emails as well as you can if you're at that stage. And also being very clear with your ask. And I think as a platform, whenever we do receive emails, what's very helpful is having that clear question, like, I need help with X, Y, and Z. And then as someone, either I can say, okay, I'm the one to help you with this, or I can redirect you to someone who can help you. So I think that is very important when reaching out and networking with people. Because as Josephine said, there's so many podcasts that come our way, and we want to help everyone. And the beauty of the podcasting community, it's a very human community. Like, I very rarely met a podcaster who's, am I allowed to say asshole?
Yeah.
I've never met a podcaster who's an asshole. So it's been, and if they haven't been able to help me, they've been able to point me in the direction of someone who can help me. So that's very That's why it's very important to be clear with your ask. And also, if they don't answer right away, it's okay. Like, it's okay. It's like, don't, like, I think a lot of times we put a lot of weight on the one email that we're going to send that, oh my God, but you know, if you send out multiple emails, if 4 people answer, that's amazing. But if you just send that one and hope that that one email is going to bring you all the answers, that's going to put so much pressure on that email. So just send out a bunch of emails. It's okay. And I know for the introverts it's hard, but we could do this. Like, we really can.
Definitely.
I really like
And also, like,
no, go ahead, Josephine.
a lot of magic happens in the comment section of an IG live. Like, we were super, like, we became quite intentional about having weekly lives with different podcasters. Some of them are commenting here, so I'm seeing a few familiar names. But the big thing is that we've had people collaborate in the comment section, you know, while everything is scrolling and people are talking. We've had people meet their mentors, and people offer knowledge and resources and support. So you don't necessarily have to actively participate. Maybe you can just pick a couple of links here and there. So every Wednesday, hopefully, we're hoping to keep this going. We have a different African podcaster, and we just talk about them and, you know, their pod and what's happening. And so in the comment section, we've had people kind of say, I really disagree with everything you've said, but I respect the fact that you put your content out there. You've told us your story, and I have nothing in common with you, but I love that you're out there, and I love that you're putting your podcast out there. And I feel like that, kind of like lights the light of the next person who feels like nobody will understand my story, nobody will understand my method. I put out, someone will say, I've put out a whole podcast episode that's just silence in honor of something significant that happened. And that's it. And you're like, why would you, record silence and then broadcast silence? And understanding why the podcasters make decisions that they make helps, anyone in their own voice kind of tell their story in a very authentic way.
I have a question for you, Josephine, specifically. When you were talking about you have an open call out on your website, we have a question from someone in the chat, and they ask, are you open to hearing from people in the diaspora, or is it just for those producing in the continent?
That's a really good question. And I think we ask ourselves this question at least once a week, if not once a day. And there's so many incredible diaspora podcasters who share an African background. And we're still asking ourselves that question. To be honest, I wish I had a really good response to how we're working with diaspora podcasters. I will say for anyone who wants to engage with Africa Podfest, for example, whatever you see in terms of our brand is partially due to a Zambian podcaster who's based in Berlin. Shout out Twambo. Who's came on board and was helping us out with brand and sort of production experience. So she was able to contribute in that sense. We've had people kind of participate in the events, even though they're not from the continent, because they signed up and were able to come and kind of sit in the room and see where their seat is. We don't intentionally program for diaspora podcasts because for us the focus is so specific to within the continent. The needs that we've been identifying over the last year or so are so geographically specific that we're still figuring it out. So if you have a really good kind of workaround for that, or if it's something that you really want to work on, please send us a direct message. We'd love to talk about how that would work out, because it feels like it's a thing we need to intentionally do. We just haven't done it yet. Melissa, jump in.
So I will say, our mission and why we started this, is because we want African voices, the new generation of African voices, to be heard, to be loud and proud on the continent and around the world, in a global arena. We do know, though, that the specific kind of needs and the scarcity of just opportunities to connect, to access resources, training, knowledge for podcasters on the continent is so high. And so we set ourselves up to meet that need first and urgently. And, we're here, like sitting in Nairobi, sensing that we are part of that kind of this environment we're moving in. But that doesn't mean that we are closed to diaspora podcasters. We just haven't kind of been intentional yet about programming specifically for diaspora, but we're very open to talking, collaborating, creating spaces, even in our events, for diaspora podcasters, I would say. So our mission, we're still part of, like African voices around the world. we're 1 year old, and we're still like, build for the specific needs that we've identified for now. Yeah.
And also, everyone who is joining us, I see the interaction and the just conversations that are happening in the chat. So I continue to do that. I want to shout out Dylan. And I see that you said that I almost feel like we need to build a cohort or a community of people that are attending this to continue network and build together. And he said, I'll start that. I already own podcastinglife.com. Follow my Twitter, and I'll build out the website so we have a community. And so he dropped his Twitter link. So please, this is what we want to encourage you to do, to continue to build community. This is a great way to do this and to support and advocate for each other. And Elias, thank you for dropping the Slack group that Rhea mentioned, MENA Podcast Forum Series in Dubai. So please click the links. Please continue to connect with one another in the chat. This is what we're here for. We're all about building community and assembling our tribe. And please continue to drop your questions in the chat for our amazing panelists, and we will take those questions. So this is already a great conversation, and I echo someone here who said this is refreshing. I feel refreshed as well, like listening to all the tips and gems that they are dropping. So crisis moments like these also present newfound opportunities, like all of you mentioned just now, one being more sophisticated and flexible use of technology and the ability to meet and congregate across many different time zones as we are doing today. Like just right here on this panel, like we're in completely different time zones. Like it's nighttime, it's midday, it's evening. You all should have saw us trying to meet this week, getting up very early for me, and they were just fitting me into their calendar. So I really appreciate that. But in what ways have you leveraged technology to build your network through local and remote partnerships during this time? You mentioned like Josephine and Melissa with Africa Podfest, like, and Rhea with the things that you're doing, like how, and we kind of touched on this, through like building like your community and supporting each other, but how have you built partnerships during this time to support the work that you're doing local and remotely?
That's a good question. Well, I think something that I've been doing, and it's a very, like, I don't know why this popped into my head when you asked that question. First of all, whenever I have a call with someone, even though it's remote, I always turn on my camera. Even if their camera, they don't turn off their camera. It's a little tiny thing, but I think when they see your face and you see their face and you can kind of have that interaction, somehow it brings you closer. And so the way to build partnerships is to have multiple conversations. So multiple Zoom calls, having a follow-up. I think so there's the quick networking of having the one call, what are you doing and all this, but I think the real strength is in the follow-up. And I was just thinking earlier today, right before we started, I was like, wow, if the pandemic had happened like 5 or 7 years ago, would we have been able to work remotely? Would we have been able to podcast remotely or to network remotely and to do all these things? So utilizing all the tools. So also LinkedIn has had I find it one of the best platforms. It is a networking platform, but I hadn't really used it before. I never thought of using it to like expand my podcasting world, but even putting as your title, putting podcast hosts or podcast producer. So if anyone's ever looking for someone like that, or if you're a freelancer or whatever. So having multiple conversations, turning on your camera, using LinkedIn, direct messaging people, also participating on the group. Because when there's that general conversation and you're always like, sometimes it's hard to like discuss, but if the people see your name coming up, then they'll associate you with whatever the topic is. So things like that are ways to kind of build relationships and build partnerships. And actually, it was through the MENA group. So at Deezer, we're creating original podcasts. So with one of the podcasters who's producing the original, it was through, like, I found out about them through Slack, had a few conversations with them, and then at the end we commissioned them to do a podcast for us. So
oh wow.
So it's just having the regular, and it was them. They're the ones who kept contacting me and saying, by the way, and maybe I could answer 3 out of the 5 times, but they were always in my mind because that repetition. So maybe that's even harder for the introverts because there's the initial one, but then it's a constant hustle. It's a constant reminder and posting on LinkedIn your own updates. This is what I'm doing, so that you're in the back of people's minds.
Oh yeah, I love that tip. It's so, I think in terms of just that initial conversation,
Yeah.
a lot of people are like, building partnerships. I mean, we're still sitting in, we're still sitting and kind of scratching our heads in some ways, because it feels like you're so small that, what impact could my direct message make? But you never know, like LinkedIn, I second that. There's also sort of like in terms of our partnerships, we've been very fortunate to have corporate support. For example, we worked with Hindenburg, who are, of course, if you're in audio, you know who Hindenburg is. If you're new to the audio space, Hindenburg is a company that is, really committed to raising the bar in terms of helping people understand digital audio workstations. But what they did for us is that they were also very generous and shared their connections in the audio space. So reaching out to a company and saying, hey, we are really interested in what, you're offering into the market. You might find someone behind the company, like you mentioned, Rhea, with Deezer. We didn't know that you were at Deezer. So if, now that you know the face, you're like, can we have a conversation? Can I send you a quick message right now in the chat? Can we kind of talk? Because it's people behind the accounts. Africa Podfest is manned by people. All these spaces, Se'era's email, there's Se'era behind the email, so it's just thinking about what would you say if we met, if we only had half a second to talk. Can I ask for your time nicely? Please ask nicely. We love like really nice asks. We can respond to nice asks, especially, being gentle with one another during a pandemic and beyond, I think is really, really key.
Yeah, I agree totally with both Rhea and Josephine. And I would add that with partnerships, you might have this, big dream of, this is what I could do with Deezer. This is what I could do with Hindenburg. But then it's like, very much like in dating, you don't kind of meet and then get engaged and start talking marriage on date 1. You kind of, chat, see if you want to go on a first date and exchange numbers, and then you go to the first date, and then you see if you want to go on another date, So, and by that I mean, like in the partnership sense, kind of once you've initiated contact and someone's agreed to meet you, and you had your first call with your video on, and you feel like you're connected, kind of find what an immediate, small, very low risk action point could be that some people could collaborate, and it could be as small as, let's do an IG live chat together, or just depending if it's a podcaster, or if it's like with a larger an organization that's larger, then you kind of just try to find what that one first experiment could be. Because then it kind of build out from there, and you really get to know each other by doing. You really get to explore and understand the true potential by doing. And we've learned this this is the approach we've taken together with Podfest Cairo, where we were talking for a while, for months, and then we kind of decided, hey, let's do this virtual meetup on International Podcast Day. And it worked so well for both of us, for both communities. So yeah, that's Rhea.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump off. First of all, the dating metaphor, loved it, perfect. And to go off of just what you both were saying, it's humans. At the end of the day, it's human relationships that you kind of need to build and come with that like human first. And we started off the the talk, talking about vulnerability and being, hey, I need help with this. What do you think about this? And also there's the long game, you know, if you're like chasing someone, the long game. And just last week, there was a friend, someone who's now a friend, but I met her like 4 years ago. She's a historian, and we wanted to do a podcast like 4 or 5 years ago about like Lebanon's history and all this stuff. And it just never happened, but we stayed in touch. I'm doing this with work, I'm doing that. And just last week, we're like, okay, now's the time. So there is that long game of a partnership that will come through. So maybe it's not the right time now. So don't, like, basically someone said baby steps in there. So I think, yes, it's starting off slow, and then hopefully one day, and also being flexible, I think, is huge. Like, not, again, emailing a lot of people, going with the flow, seeing what happens. I think especially when you're starting off, it's very important.
I really like that. I hope everyone is catching all of the gems that are being thrown out. Like, you know, there's humans behind the email addresses. There are humans behind the Twitter accounts or things of that nature. So making sure that you're asking nicely, that you're like responding as though you're in person. Like Melissa said, you know, just start by doing and reaching out to people. And in Rhea, just also like finding, like you mentioned, like finding that balance between, like, you know, clearly stating your intentions, but also working out the long game, as Melissa mentioned, like dating. Like, you just don't hop into dating like, okay, we're gonna get married in the next 2 hours. Like, no, like, you gotta court me, send me flowers, and not like sending gifts, but actually like taking time to cultivate and build relationships, because out of those relationships, something beautiful can happen. And like Rhea mentioned, it's all about timing. Like, she met this person a few months or just a while ago, but just now are they able to work together. So again, as Rhea also mentioned earlier, just because someone, or I can't remember if it was Rhea or Melissa or Josephine, but it's just because someone doesn't respond at that very moment does not mean that you won't be able to connect. It just takes time, just being flexible. So these are all great gems. And please, again, I hope you are writing down these gems or just collecting them, because it's all great and practical tips. I do want to point out there is a podcast in Africa session. So if you haven't already, you can please just head over there after the conversation. I still want you to stick around for this conversation. But afterwards, go to the sessions huddle and just be able to like plug in and connect. Again, please drop any links in the chat. Also, any questions that you may have. These are all really, really great questions, and it's just a great conversation. I do have a question for Rhea. Someone did ask, how do you get your podcast on Deezer?
How do you get your? So you do it through any of your hosting providers. Typically, there is the Deezer button. Also, I will share. Let me get the link. The direct place where you can. Sorry, doing this live, guys. I'm going to drop the direct link where you can just submit your RSS feed. And please, I shared my LinkedIn in this chat. So depending on which market you're in, I can always put you in touch with a colleague of mine who's handling that market. Also, if you're from Middle East or Turkey, North Africa, please get in touch with me. I would love to hear about your podcast. I would love to help grow your audience and just find out what you guys are doing.
And this is a reminder, like, just to Rhea's point, we do have in our profiles, we have our LinkedIn, Twitter, and website. So please make those connections. This is what this is here for. We're here to build community. We're not shooting off. We're here to really just, really unite during this time and support and advocate each other. We have another question from the chat. What are some of your favorite ways to court connections, though? Like, you're telling me to court someone, do the long game. How do I do that practically? So what are some tips that you have for that?
I have kind of principled, and I learned this actually by watching years ago some documentary about how this Run DMC back in the day had this Adidas partnership, and how that happened was that they'd been trying to court Adidas. At the time they were not so huge as a rap group, and they'd been trying to court Adidas for so long and just were unsuccessful. So what they ended up doing was doing a concert where they put on Adidas and then they performed the song, the one where they talk about "This Is My Adidas."
Yes.
And then they invited the Adidas execs, and then they were in for the endorsement, for the marriage, essentially. And so what the principle there that we've tried to apply at Africa Podfest as well is bring if you can't take Muhammad to the mountain, take the mountain to Muhammad. I might be mistaking what this is. Essentially, create opportunities, show rather than tell. So, like for us, we're Africa Podfest. We want to bring people together to build an ecosystem. You can talk and talk and talk and talk and have pitch decks and slides and videos, but you've just got to do it by having an event and bringing people in. Or you can talk about the numbers and the stats and how podcasters are doing this and that, and the audience wants podcasts. But the more effective thing to do is to put a research report in front of people that has the actual evidence, So that's action, like do something, and it doesn't have to be huge and high budget. Just do it at whatever stage you can. So if you can't afford to do a huge survey to collect data, kind of just do one in your community, in your school, start wherever you are with whatever you have, and kind of work up from that. Yeah, but
show rather than tell.
Yes. There's not been enough said about exchanging. So like I'd like you to do this. So can I offer something also? Because if everybody has something they can share. Everyone has an opportunity to exchange. And I think creating those kind of like really close contact things where, maybe, hey, Rhea, I spend a lot of time building community. I can talk about that. Hey, can we talk about that on your next pod? I think it would be really useful. And maybe could you do this on my pod or in my community? Can you share a specific resource? And, sharing, I think being going into things with a mindset of being generous so that you get, you're not just going into what am I going to get out of this, is what am I going to give out of this, has been something that really, really is rewarding in a world where, things are scarce. Everyone tells you, grab what you can and run out. And then you find you have no community. And so then where are you? So it's really, really, it's small gestures, it's genuine gestures, and it's being authentic and saying, I don't have anything really to give, but I'd be open to seeing what you need and see if I can help with that. I don't know exactly what you might need in this space. So let's talk. Can we talk? Can we do like 2 seconds, can we do like 20 seconds? And, that's been something that's really given a lot to the conversation.
I love what you
both reciprocal.
said. Yeah. I love what you both said. And I think to piggyback off of what you said, Josephine, I think also really understanding what the person you're doing is doing, because sometimes you might put in your head, oh, I really need to work with Melissa because we have all these things, and you make all these assumptions. So you just go in with your ask. But if you take the time of understanding what Melissa does, because maybe it turns out that maybe you shouldn't be working together and you shouldn't be courting her, but maybe she can put you in touch with someone after that you can work together. And also to go off of what you said is go into it also with confidence of knowing that you also have something to offer in this, and not just in this like power dynamic to feel that you're inferior and that you're going and looking up and please help me, but you're also bringing something to the table. And I think that's so powerful in a community where there is general exchange and being human and wanting to help each other. And again, podcasters don't seem to be assholes. So I think people generally want to help. And also an advice actually my co-host said to me once is that when you're meeting someone, asking them, who else should I be talking to? Who else should I meet? So kind of expanding. So at the end of the meeting saying like, hey, it was great to meet you. I hope to continue the conversation. Is there anyone you recommend I meet who would we possibly have points of interest, like commonalities? So I think that also takes the pressure off a bit of this is the one relationship that's gonna be my be all end all. So that's another way as well.
Yeah, I like how someone said in the comments, it's like it's the same things we're taught as kids about making friends. Sometimes it does feel like that. It's like, hey, Melissa, I really like the way you've put together your podcast. Hi, I don't know what to say to you, but hi, I see you.
Yeah.
Thank you for putting your
Yeah.
stuff out there. I think that's genuine, and it's a great place to start.
Yes. And sometimes it's just fun to talk to people, just to say like, hey, I love your podcast, and that's it, and just make friends, just like you said, and be like, this is cool, and then things will start flowing naturally, I think, as well.
So switching gears a little bit, again, I want to encourage people, please drop your questions or comments in the chat. Please continue to foster community. I'm seeing a lot of you connecting and sharing things, so please continue to do that. But I do want to touch on something. Although we have been able to leverage technology and found fresh and innovative ways to connect and build partnerships in the midst of like this pandemic, what challenges have you faced doing so, and how have you overcome those challenges? Sometimes we make it sound super easy, like, just in the comments or just connect with someone here. But sometimes things can, like, you can run into unexpected hiccups or challenges. So what challenges, if any, that you face during this time, or just trying to build those connections and partnerships through technology at this moment, and how have you overcome them? And what are some great tips that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, so some of the main challenges. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so some of the challenges, really the main one I would say has been just the kind of falling apart of people's plans, people and organizations, big and small, which has been, I would say, that's a short-term kind of problem. But then having to then figure out, it's been really challenging figuring out, okay, so how do we turn around? How do I turn around what this value is that I started out to provide, and still stay relevant and figure out a way to be relevant to the community, and also and be able to pitch that in a partnerships sense. And that could mean anything from like creating new products or tweaking what you were thinking of doing. So like for us with Africa Podfest, we were initially going to be an in-person once a year event. And then, because of going through this process, which was much more difficult than it sounds, just by talking about like pivoting, asking ourselves, why are we really here? Why did we start this, and why do we exist? And what do people really need, right? In all the different, locally, internationally, what does an individual podcaster need? What does a company like Deezer need? And so we ended up with realizing that our mission is to inspire and elevate the African podcaster. And that opened up suddenly all the ways that we could then create opportunities and offer ourselves to collaborate as collaborators from everyone, from the one podcaster to the Hindenburg Corporation. That's kind of one. That's been our experience, but it's been a challenging process, and it doesn't end. It's not like it doesn't have a start point and end point. It's that every day you have to. It's more like it's a disposition. Adapting is a way of. It's a kind of a life philosophy. It's a way of being. You just have to reflect every day, be intentional every day, be present every day, and it's work. It's work.
It is.
Adapting is a way of being. Sorry, that was just amazing. Like mic drop moment.
Yes. Wow, Melissa.
Yeah. So that's what I would say about what it's been like and the challenges.
Yeah. I would add also like they're having some, like we have an advisory board.
I see people.
Sorry, can you hear me?
People's
so there's we have an advisory board, and what happens with the advisory board
and had to change.
Oh, sorry.
I do like the.
Wait, sorry. Melissa, can you hear Josephine? I mean, we can come right back to you.
That's okay. I'll come. I think we have a delay on the comment.
A tech delay.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead, Josephine. Sorry.
No, I think it's worth getting a couple of people who you can call before the challenges come, I think we were super fortunate to have an amazing advisory board who we called when we first started hearing the not going to be the big dreams of 2020. Like we literally call them, they are professionals in their field, they're in digital tech, podcaster, and they were on the phone and listen to us and they kind of give us very strategic advice that helped us feel grounded at a time when we just felt like everything is just falling apart. And so if you can, and if you're fortunate enough to ask one or two people who can I call you? Can you be there for me in this very specific way, and be very clear what you're asking for. If it's, I need a 20-minute call every 2 months to just talk about this specific thing, it's easier to get someone to commit to something you can offer than something that you've clearly outlined and that you give kind of a little bit of structure to. And that helps with overcoming challenges because there's so many challenges. And some of the moments it's like, you need a sounding board, but then at other times you also want people to celebrate with you. You need like people who've seen you, along your journey, who may or may not be your, friends or family. They might not even be people before, but they respect what you're doing and they want to be engaged in the work. So shout out to our advisory board and all the people who do advisory and mentorship work. Thank you. You guys are the ones who carry us in many, many ways.
I like what you said, Josephine, before jumping to Rhea, but like, we also sometimes think about our tribe as just someone that we, gain insight or just we help each other. But there's also something beautiful about cheering other people on and just celebrating, having someone that you can celebrate with. I think about Jacqueline Hill, who had led a session early on about, developing your inner host. And she and we met back at a radio station in DC, but I'm a part of her tribe. She's a part of my tribe, but we are really big on just celebrating each other, celebrating those small wins, and having someone who's in the industry or in the same field as you and being able to celebrate those wins together is so huge. So that's something that you said that just stood out to me. It's not just about, what you can get out of a relationship or what, and it's also about what you can give, but it's also about just celebrating those small milestones and just being able to say, yes, like you did it. I'm so proud of you. Or just having those little moments. I'm a really big proponent. I love Beyonce. So like I would throw on Formation or I would throw on the Homecoming album and just like, yes, girl, you did this. Like, I'm so proud of you. So I really like that tidbit of information, Josephine. Celebrating together within your tribe is also very, very important. And it helps encourages you as you go forward. And Rhea?
Quick, everyone show me their celebratory dance when something good happens.
Uh-oh.
I love it. I'm calling you guys whenever something good happens. I agree.
We're ready.
Yes.
Call us.
We're ready.
Yes. International dance party. I love it. I totally agree. And I think the best way to overcome any challenge is to surround yourself with your tribe and also to celebrate the victories. And I think this whole pandemic just made us kind of like what you were saying, just reshift the way we do everything. Like I remember when we started out around the world, we're like, no Zoom interviews, all the interviews are in person. And then it was like, well, sorry, now all our interviews are on Zoom and we just have to deal with it, or all our networking, everything has to be on Zoom. So really being adaptable and being resilient and perseverant, and having your sounding boards really, and I love what you said about the advisory board, but having those kind of, like, I don't have an advisory board, but I have like 2 or 3 friends who I are called my honorary personal and professional advisory board, who I'll just call up just to think out loud with. And I think one of the biggest challenges was, because I started my job during the pandemic, and it was all about how do you make a connection when you've never seen the person, or how do you, because I went to the podcast movement last year, the conference, and it was such an eye-opening event and meeting people in person, and you think that's the only way. So now you're like, okay, that no longer exists. what's an alternative. And it's so easy, especially when you're on lockdown and you're quarantining at home and all you see are the four walls and you're just like, oh, this is done. And then it's like, no, there is a way to do it. So really being perseverant, having your tribe, reaching out to people, finding new people who can be a part of your tribe, who you can share things with. All three of you, I would like to tell you, have become a part of my tribe. So just be ready for me to send you guys messages like, what do I do with this? And also turn to your audience. That's something for me that's really helped during this time where asking them like, hey, what do you guys think? What are we doing that's good? What are we doing that's not good? Being vulnerable on the microphone for all the hosts and podcasters. Just really being like, you know what? Like when I started my job and Marilyn, my co-host, lost her job and we went, that was the first episode we recorded. And we talked about how difficult it was. And it was just full, like all cards are on the table. And we're like, listen, we're figuring this out. We have no idea what's going to happen. Let's go. And the response was so filled with love and support. So also your audience, to go back to what Melissa said at the beginning, to have your audience tribe, that other side of the community that's really going to show up for you and being like, hey, and also asking them for feedback about your show, being like, hey, do you like this new segment that we did about cheese? Are you up for it? And if they're not, fine, they don't like it. And so kind of having that also that other conversation with the people who are listening to you, because that's also a very important part of your tribe and your relationship when it comes to podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
Someone did ask, someone asked if we will have this chat available. I will look and make sure that we do, because there's a lot of great gems and a lot of great, amazing things, connections that were shared in this chat. So I will double check. I do believe that we do have it. But if we do, I will make sure to try to get that out to everyone who has attended this session, because I think will be really cool. But we do have a question from the audience. And it says, curious about opinions. In the early stages, do you feel it is necessary to find an ad sponsorship to carry the podcast production if this is your main career?
Very good question. Very tough one. Yes and no is my answer somehow, because I think as a podcaster, you should be getting paid if that's your full-time job, and you should be finding a source of income. But at the same time, if you're just starting out, it's very difficult to get the sponsor, because unfortunately, we live in a world that's data-driven, and they need to see that you have an audience. And if you have that audience, it's so much easier for you to get that support and that help and that push. Actually, I'm not saying this because I work at a platform. My advice would be, if you're starting out, instead of chasing sponsorship, chase your audience and reach out to the platforms, because actually I'm one of them, but behind the platforms are humans who are deciding what content is going to go forward. And actually that's more efficient than any social media, so really go talk to the platform, pitch to them your idea. And I don't remember if Melissa, or I think it was Melissa who said this, create your proof of concept, put it out there, show people what you have. And also, so chase the platforms, pitch to them your idea, and also find other podcasters and do episode swaps. So kind of bring their audience over to you, be a guest on their show, bring them as a guest on your show. So that's what I would say your focus should be, as opposed to looking for sponsors. And then once you got those numbers, then you can go get the sponsors. But at the beginning, I feel like that would be your energy is better suited elsewhere than to try and go find that. And instead of finding sponsors, apply for grants, I applied for the Google Podcast Creator Program. So really hone in your pitching skills. And that's a great way to kind of get funding so that you're able to create the podcast of your dreams.
I really like what you said, Rhea. Chase your audience instead of chasing sponsorships. I really like that. I think that's like so many people miss that. How big is to invest in your audience and build up your audience and your base versus chasing a sponsorship early on. So that was really great information. So we have about 10 minutes left, and my heart is like sinking. It's sinking because this conversation is so fruitful. And I echo Rhea, like I want to like continue this, like just continue this tribe. You know, we can meet, maybe we can do a happy hour wind down. I don't know. We could do something.
Right.
But I do have a final question for you all before we come to a close. Is if you can give one essential tip. So out of all the tips that you've already provided, and you've all have dropped some amazing gems, but if you can give just one essential tip before you leave, if they haven't listened to anything else you've said today, but just this one tip to someone looking to build or engage their tribe, what would it be?
I would say it's get to know what you're about. Yes, as a podcaster, you know, in whatever part of the podcast work and universe you're moving in, why are you doing what you're doing? What do you really care about? That made you start to do this, and that you would do before the sponsors, you know, without any money, when you're tired after your day job and you come home and you still want to do this. Like, be very clear about what it is that you are setting out to do and why and what it means to you, and also what your voice is, you know. So as Melissa, I stand for including people who have been typically excluded, you know. I stand for XYZ and I don't stand for XYZ. And just be very clear about that and the energy that you move with, and be intentional, because your community, the community that ends up gathering around you, is going to be responding to what you put out and the energy and the vibes you put out. So just kind of invest in really being clear within yourself about what you're about.
Knowing who you are. Yes. Okay. Josephine or Rhea, what's your tip?
Okay. My number one tip in terms of this community conversation is we've had people in the chat from so many countries. I saw people looking for from every country on earth, and even maybe beyond. I don't know. There's a huge global sound of podcasting. There's a familiarity in the global podcasting space, but you're telling hyper local stories. And you are painting pictures with your audio and your stories and your style that can't be found anywhere else. Resist the temptation to become like your favorite podcaster to a T. Like, get the techniques, get the technical know-how, but retain that voice, because where you are, there's nobody else telling the kind of story you are, the kind of audio maker you are. Please don't lose that. We don't need more of this other person. We need more of you. So please stick to that. Yeah.
I absolutely love that. We need more of you. Oh my gosh. I'm about to tweet this. Rhea.
So after you know your why, as Melissa said, and after you are authentic to yourself, as Josephine said, my advice would be, once you get those two pillars, just do it. Just don't take that leap. Publish your first episode. Put yourself out there, whether you're introverted or extroverted. Just do it. Just not to quote Nike, but yeah, just do it. But really put yourself out there. It's scary. Be vulnerable. I know it's very terrifying, but once you do, everything will come into place. And whether you want to talk to that person who you admire their podcast and you want their advice, whether you want to join a Facebook group, whatever it is, just put yourself out there. It's very difficult, but taking that first step, taking that first leap, which is publishing your podcast, once you've done that, you're halfway there. So just keep going.
So our three main tips to walk away with is, number one, what Melissa gave us, understanding your why, knowing who you are. Josephine, as she said, number two, that pillar is just, we need more of you, not more of anyone else. And Rhea, just do it, to quote Nike. Oh my goodness, ladies, this was such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation just to talk. Thank you for everyone in the chat who either submitted questions, submitted comments, just took the time to interact with each other and just to participate and be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much. If you make sure that you click on our profiles and you connect with us, follow us on Twitter, Africa Podfest, connect with Rhea, connect with Melissa and Josephine, connect with PRX and us. Make sure that you like LinkedIn, as Rhea said, send a request on LinkedIn. Don't be shy, but make sure you be clear and intentional with your ask. And as Josephine said, be nice. Don't be nasty. As Rhea said, don't be an asshole, okay? We don't do that over here. But please, in the additional resources and links, stop by the different booths and the expo area. Please utilize networking. Me and Rhea were talking. We had so much fun when we first logged on, just networking with other people. So please make sure you do that. And also, we have more amazing programming throughout the rest of the day. So please stick around for the sessions if you can, for the expo area. And we're having an after party tonight. We have a live DJ, and we're gonna party at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific time, 12 a.m. GMT time, and then just from there. I've told Rhea, Melissa, and Josephine, I've been learning the time zone.
It's like 5 a.m. and Dubai time.
Oh,
so I'll see you guys at breakfast. I'll see you guys
at breakfast. Have a mimosa, join us, have your drinks. And right now we're about to, in about 4 minutes, if you need to relax, if you need to recharge, join us for an hour of live meditation in our meditation room. We're 10% happier. So I've enjoyed this conversation so much. Thank you to the three of you. You're so amazing. You're so awesome. And this is not the last time you're going to hear from me. Like, we're friends now, as Rhea said. I'm a part of your time.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And you are part of ours.
Yes.
I feel so cool.
Guys, I'm going to take a screenshot on my computer. So everyone, ready? 1, 2. Yay.
Yeah, please send that to me. I'll definitely put it on social media. I'm so excited. Again, thank you for the amazing gems. And we got to do this again sometime. We got to do
whenever you want.
Whenever. Okay, cool. Awesome.
Count on it.
Have a great rest of the day. Please join all the other sessions. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.